That's right. Yes, we're all very excited. Yes, why are people not coming here to the front and sitting? Are you scared of me or something like that?
It's sweet.
You are scared. No, I'm mellowing. I'm gradually mellowing, as you've noticed. Right? I'm not as strict as I was at the beginning. You may yawn. You're allowed to yawn. You're allowed to have micro sleeps occasionally. You're allowed to what was the other thing you weren't supposed to do? What's that? Yeah, so it's okay. I still, yeah, well, you will still get some points. That's fine. So it's okay, don't be afraid. Just come. Those of you who can understand English and don't need translation, just come forward a bit. Some of you, Niels and people like that, I can't see their faces, so I can't tease them if I can't see them. Just come forward and sit here close. I don't bite.
I have forgotten how many points I have got now.
Yeah, well, that's your responsibility, Oria. Nobody keeps your points for you. Remember, your own volition. Everything, all you potentially possess, including your points, can only be revealed or can only, come out as a result of your own effort and volition.
Thank you, please.
So, sorry, I can't take responsibility for your points. If you want to cash them in, you count them. And get as many as possible. That's the other thing. You need to be a bit more interactive. I mean, I know the Swedes are really reserved and introverted and quiet. By Jove, this is the quietest summer school I've ever been in my whole life. But, you can actually be a bit, you can speak up and show a little bit. Yeah, there you go. Show a bit of animation. It's okay. It's all right. You will actually get points. You won't have them deducted. So remember yesterday, we touched upon this yesterday and the day before about the collective evolution of humanity through progressive revelation, right? Through the coming of these educators of humanity's collective infancy and childhood, and how this was compared to the growth of a seed into a fruit-bearing tree, and how the first 6,000 years, the Adamic cycle, beginning with Adam, the first human being, and also the first manifestation of God or the messenger of God, and ending with Muhammad, peace be upon him, the seal of the prophets. This was the period of prophecy. This was the period of preparation. This was the period of humanity's collective infancy and childhood. All of them preparing humanity, teaching, helping this little child to grow up into an adolescent, a very short period of time, which is actually what we're going through right now, preparing us for the long-awaited coming of age, of maturity, of fruit-bearing of the human race. And we discussed yesterday about why some of the laws and some of the sayings of the scriptures, etc., were suited to the capacity of those people who heard the manifestations of God. So Jesus said, I have many things to say to you, you can't bear them now, etc. The manifestations of God spoke in the language of metaphor and told stories. And Jesus said, actually, do you know why I talk to you in, they said, why do you talk to you in metaphors? He said, I talk to you in metaphors and symbols and stories so that you could understand my meaning. And manifestations of God used many, many metaphors, and we talked about all the things that today for us who are growing up into adolescence, into adults, we are questioning, why did they speak like this? And there are all these questions and controversies arising as a result of apparent discrepancies and the way that they spoke to us, that we think that we don't understand and it's not right and so on. So we talked about all of those, and then we came across the prophecies from the previous revelations, and we stopped with the prophecies from the Christian Bible, from the Christian Testament, the New Testament and the Old Testament. And we stopped where we were going to discuss some of the prophecies of the Islamic religion. And remember that the false prophets were barred from entering into the Holy Land, right? So the Bible contains many of these. The Quran contains many. We don't have time to go into them. As you know, it will assume impossible dimensions. So I'm just sharing with you a few of the prophecies from each holy book. Right. What about some of the prophecies in Islam? Well, the Quran talks about 2 trumpet blasts. 2 trumpet blasts coming quickly, one after the other, which is interesting. And those 2 are referring to the revelations of the Bab, the gate, and Bahá'u'lláh, the glory of God. And it talks about the great announcement. And there are several hadiths, several oral traditions of Muhammad, both recorded in the Shia as well as the Sunni tradition books attributed to Muhammad and the Imams and the holy Imams, that are full of lots and lots of prophecies about the coming of the return of the promised one. So, for example, here's one from Dalailul Irfan. Ere long, God will shine from the face of the glory of the most glorious, which is Bahá'u'lláh, with the name of Baha, that's all in Arabic, by the way, on the day of absolute in the plain of Akka. Isn't that amazing? Say yes.
Yes.
Come on, it's morning, it's awake, you've had breakfast and coffee, and loaded with caffeine now and food.
We were stunned.
Stunned?
We were stunned. That's why we were so
Yeah,
quiet.
that's
We were
okay.
stunned by this.
Okay, you're allowed a couple of seconds of lapse. That's fine. All of them, so this is interesting. And you know, the Sheikh Bahá'í, there was actually a very prominent and wonderful clergy called, I can't remember his real name, but he was actually entitled Sheikh Bahá'í because he discovered from all his readings, this was in the 16th, 17th century, right? He discovered from all the writings of Islam, from all the scripture of Islam, that God had several names, and the greatest name of God was Baha, and there is which means glory, and there is the wonderful prayer of the fast. Have you read it? Have you read the prayer? Oh my God, I'm going to put it on later for those. I've got it on the computer. It's fantastic. It's chanted in the most beautiful Arabic. Although Majid will chant it probably more beautifully. But there is this prayer of the fast that the Muslims listen to by the Imam Sadiq, and it names all the names of God, and it starts with Baha. As'aluka bi Bahá'ika al-Bahiyya, all the derivatives of glory. And this Sheikh Bahá'í recognized that this was the greatest name of God, Baha, and he became known as Sheikh Bahá'í, actually in the 16th, 17th century, which is very interesting. That's how he's known. And the Iranians actually made a series about him, which is fascinating. Not knowing quite that this has all appeared. All of them, this is from Futuhat al-Makkiyah. These are from the oral traditions of His Holiness Muhammad. All of them, that is companions of the Qa'im, he who will arise. All of them will be slain except one who shall reach the plain of Akka, the banquet hall of God. Now, what's Akka? Akka was this terrible fortress city, I'll show you pictures of it, on the coast of the Holy Land, right? And many others. There are so many, I cannot have them. And Baha'u'lláh, in fact, at the end of the Epistle to the Son of the Wolf, the last of his major works, he quotes verbatim 4 pages worth of prophecies just about Akka. If you're interested, you can go and read that. It's also online. And then there is this great, there are many, many, many verses. There is a whole book called Baha'u'lláh in the Quran, written by a Jewish person who became a Baha'i, right, who therefore believed in Christ and Muhammad as well. From being a Jew, he had missed several steps. So he recognized Christ and Muhammad, and he wrote a book about the prophecies of Islam. It's this thick. I've not managed to get through it. Seriously. It's called Baha'u'lláh in the Quran. It's not translated into English, but has many Arabic verses in it. What are they asking? This surah, this chapter in the Quran is very significant. It's the surah of Naba. It's the chapter about the great announcement. It says, what are they saying? What are they asking one another about the great announcement about which they dispute? They say, oh, is it going to happen? Is it not going to happen? They say, and he says, what are they saying? The great announcement, nay, they shall certainly know its truth. And then again, they shall certainly know its truth. It's repeated twice, which is very interesting. So it is two truths, if you like, right? And repeated, or the one truth repeated twice, which Baha'is believe it's referred to both the Bab and Bahá'u'lláh, who came in such close succession, 1844, 1853, within a very close succession. On the day whereon the Spirit and the angels shall be ranked in order, they shall not speak, save he whom the God of mercy shall permit, and who shall say that which is right. This is the sure day. Whoso then will, in other words, whoever wishes to then, let him take the path to return to his Lord. Okay. And there are many mystic meanings to these. And then there's the two trumpet blasts. And this is all prophesying about the last days, right? The day when the Lord will come, etc. Then there shall be a blast on the trumpet, and all who are in the heaven and all who are on the earth shall expire. It means they shall faint, right, and die. But that's in a metaphorical way, right? Save those whom God shall vouchsafe to live, except those who are actually responding and they recognize and they live. Then shall there be another blast on it. Interesting, isn't it? Say yes.
Yes.
Good. Very good. And lo, arising, they shall gaze around them, so they will then rise out of the dead, having expired. They will then arise with the second trumpet blast. Arising out, they shall gaze around them, and wow, lo, the earth shall shine with the light of the Lord. And what does the light of the Lord mean? Bahá'u'lláh, the glory of God. It's the same. It's all synonyms for the same thing. And it says in another chapter in the Quran, he will return to you on the day of judgment, on the Qiyamah, reverted back, he will return you, reverted back to when you were first created. A section guided and a section will go astray. So the same thing will happen every time. A proportion of the people will respond, right? And they will take forward this new civilization, become a new race of men, just like they did the first time, like Bilal and all those people that you mentioned, and Hamza and all the Abu Bakr and all the first disciples and the Ummah of Islam who then followed, right? And then a section will arise in opposition, or they will not listen, right? They just carry on until later on they will recognize many centuries or years later, and a section will go astray. There we go. And this concept of the seal of the prophets is actually a very interesting concept, because in the Quran, it very clearly says that Muhammad is the last of he's a messenger of God and the seal of the prophets. But he very clearly talks about the fact that the time of prophecy, which is Nabuwat, right? He was the Nabi, the prophet who prophesies about the future, but Nabuwat is finished. The time of telling prophecy is finished because the time of fulfillment has come. It's okay, Charlotte, you can talk. Say it out loud.
Fulfillment.
Very good.
You
Excellent.
saw me say it.
That's right. I saw you, but
Wordlessly.
you don't need to mime it. You can also say it out loud. It's good. We need to, get the Swedes to speak up a bit. That's fine. For every nation, it says in the Quran, in the Surah Al-A'raf, for every nation is an appointed time. For a nation, we mean Ummah, which means a religious dispensation, right? Say Judaism, which was between this year and this year, Christianity between the year 1 AD and 1844 AD, for example, or 620 actually, until Muhammad appeared in 620 or 610 in fact. Then, there is every dispensation. Remember the Toltec eras we talked about the other day? The South, there is eras, and they're appointed at an appointed time. Then the next messenger, the next manifestation of God comes. And this is very well explained in some of the verses of the Quran. For every nation is an appointed time. When their time has come, they cannot delay it by an hour, nor can they advance it. When their time is finished, that's it. It's an appointed time, and it's a preordained event by God. It's not just a random thing happening suddenly out of, at a particular time. It's preordained by the divine, that this is the time that's appointed. Nobody can advance it an hour, or they can't delay it for an hour. When your time's up, that's it. right? It's the same with our destiny, right? When your number's up, that's it. You can't do anything about it. It's your destiny, you know. It's the same as when you're supposed to come into this world. We have no control over it. O ye children of Adam. Who are the children of Adam?
Everyone.
Everyone, thank you very much. Human beings. Good, now you're speaking. Whenever there come to you messengers from amongst you, so Rasul, amma ya'tiyannakum imma ya'tiyannakum rasulun minni. When they come in the future, and it's also a emphasis on it too in the Arabic, which has not been translated actually into the English. Whenever there surely come to you messengers from amongst you, in other words, God chooses somebody from among you, like a human physical. Remember we talked about the twin stations of the messengers of God. It's the human station which they share with us, but also the divine, which is the Spirit speaking through them, right? Whenever they come to you messengers, Rasul, from amongst you, rehearsing my signs unto you, those who are righteous and mend their ways, on them shall be no fear, neither shall they grieve. And then he says, but those, continues, those who don't listen, they shall go astray. And, you know, they won't be so happy, basically. You know, they will be like, it's like John said in the beginning of the gospel. He said, and he came, like Jesus came, like a light into the world. Right? That whoever turns to him, right, turns towards the sun, may not walk in darkness, but he shall be enlightened. And when you see the light, when you have the light, you can see much more easily. You're much happier. You don't bump into things, right? You don't fall in a ditch. Okay, so it's much easier. Alas for my servants, there comes not a messenger to them, but they mock him. And this has happened all the time. So God says, you know, every time a messenger comes, and he didn't say came, but he says comes, as of now and in the future. Every time a messenger comes, unfortunately, what happens? People ridicule him and mock him and persecute him and his followers and so on. And that's happened all along through history. And then, again, in the Quran, it refers to the future revelations of God. But as for those who reject our revelations and are too proud to accept them, these are the inmates of the fire, where they remain forever. Remember the hellfire? And we talked about the concept of paradise, hellfire, etc., being references in order that they could educate and uplift the souls of human beings. This hope for reward and fear of punishment, right? Not that there is actually a place where there's the devil and there's eternal fire and you get stuck in there and burn forever, right? Or a mansion full of grapes and pomegranates. Did you know pomegranates are a heavenly fruit? They are. It's in the Quran many times. It's a superfood, now we know, right? Many antioxidants, keeps you forever young, really good stuff. Okay, it talks about, you know, dates and pomegranates and grapes and several other fruits that are heavenly fruits and superfoods. You know, you can have them freely in that next world forever, and the virgins and so on, right? So, and wine, river of wine, and water, and honey, and milk, and 4 types of river flowing in the garden. It's really good fun. Yeah, look forward to it. These are the inmates of fire, where they will remain forever. Who does greater wrong than he who invents lies about God or denies his revelations when he comes? Sorry, can you see? That denies his revelations. So that's about, you know, the coming revelations of God, that every time there is, of course, this continuity. Spring comes after winter every time. The day, you know, the sun shines every morning after the long night. Okay? And then there's some very interesting ones, and this is the end of the prophecies. He it is who created the heavens and the earth in 6 days, and then he established himself on his throne, and his throne was upon the water. Now that's very interesting. How can somebody sit on water, right? Establish throne on water. So basically it's talking about God, and in the Quran it says that every day that is mentioned in the Holy Scriptures is equivalent to 1,000 years. Both in the Bible and in the Quran it says that explicitly, that one day equals to 1,000 years. So God creates the heavens and the earth in 6 days. Then he sits on his throne on his seventh day, and his throne is upon the water, which is very interesting. It sort of baffled some of the thinkers. So the 6 days, these are according to actually Islamic scholars themselves. I didn't make them up. Baha'is didn't make them up. It's Islamic scholars and the imams, actually, many of those who have interpreted these writings. So these refer, the 6 days of creation refer to the 6 days of evolution within the Adamic cycle. They refer to the 6 manifestations of God: Adam, Abraham, the Semitic ones, and Zoroaster thrown in there as well, because that was very closely geographically related to them. Adam, Abraham, Zoroaster, Moses, Jesus Christ, and Muhammad, right? And the 7th day, this is very interesting. The 7th day is when God comes in the glory of the Father, in the glory of God. He establishes his throne upon the water, which is very interesting, because remember that Bahá'u'lláh came, actually wherever he was really close to water. But when he finally came to the Akka, which is where we talked about the prophecies, this is where he was, right on the water, right? And this is where he was for the last 20 years of his life. And even before that, he was, as I said, close to water. And this is now where just across the bay, this is where he is. His shrine is now. This is where Akka is. This is Haifa on Mount Carmel, on the mountain of God. And this bay goes right across. Over there is Akka, the prison city, right, which I showed you the picture of a minute ago. And Bahji, which is where he's buried, very close to there, where he actually had the view of the Mediterranean, is right by the sea too. And this, of course, is the seat of the Universal House of Justice, which is the first truly democratically elected international universal body on the earth in the history of the planet, the truly universally elected and democratically elected body on the planet. And this is the administrative and spiritual center of the faith for the whole world. This is like the nerve and the heart center of the future world civilization. And it's by the sea, as you can see. And it's in the Holy Land. It's in the Holy Land, which all the scriptures have talked about. It's unbelievable, isn't it?
Yes.
Yes. Yes. So remember, Bahá'u'lláh and we talked about, Kurosh gave us a nice presentation last night, claims to be the promised one of all ages, right? And it's no small claim, of course. Not many people dare to claim such a thing. And then we'll go into the story of actually what happened, because anybody can come and say, yeah, I'm a messenger, I'm a prophet, come and follow me. But there are many consequences to that. And then that's the proofs and the testimonies that the evidences we were supposed to look at. And we'll look at his life story in a minute. So to Israel, he was neither more nor less than the incarnation of the everlasting Father, the Lord of hosts, come down with 10,000 saints. To Christendom, Christ returned in the glory of the Father. To Shia Islam, the return of Imam Hussein. To Sunni Islam, the descent of the Spirit of God, Jesus Christ. To the Zoroastrians, the promised Shah Bahram. To the Hindus, the reincarnation of Krishna, Kalki avatar. To the Buddhists, the 5th Buddha. Now, we're going to start a journey through the earthly life of Bahá'u'lláh. So we're going to look at his self and his story. And this is a very interesting and wonderful journey of lots of stories. So it's a whole storytelling session. And in Ezekiel, it says, "Behold, the glory of the God of Israel came from the way of the east. And his voice was like the voice of many waters, and the earth shined with his glory." And again, what is the glory of Israel? Glory of God? Bahá'u'lláh, exactly. So in Arabic, that's what that is. And Bahá'u'lláh was born, of course, here would be Holy Land, right? Just here, and this is, he's come by the way of the Okay, sorry, over here. I'm very bad at geography, sorry. I'm just testing you actually. just to make sure that you've actually, you're alert, right? Niels, you've been terribly quiet. You usually blurt out the answers, right? So yes, it's over here, and it says that he will come by the way of the east, the glory of the God of Israel. And his voice was like the voice of many waters. So the many seas and waters, and it says he'll come from mountain to mountain. We'll look at this. His birthplace was in Tehran, Iran, on the 12th of November, 1817, and the 2nd of Muharram, 1233 AH, which is after the Hijra, which is the Islamic calendar. And 1817 is Annum Domini, which is the Christian calendar. Remember that the Islamic calendar is lunar, whereas this is solar. The Christian calendar is solar. So, Bahá'u'lláh was born in a noble family in Persia. This is the city of Tehran. At that, an earlier picture of it where he was born. And he derived his descent. He was born into a noble family. His father was an extremely wealthy person, Mirza Buzurg, descending from one of the great ancient families of northern Iran. And he actually was a minister in the court of the Shah, a minister in the court of the king of Persia. And he derived his descent, someone called Mirza Abul Fazl, who's one of the greatest scholars. He was actually an Islamic scholar with a huge turban. Like, the bigger your turban was, it meant the bigger your knowledge was, and the bigger your rank was in the clergy. And he had a huge big turban, and a big mullah, and very learned, very, very learned. One of the most, in fact, the most learned person in the country, likely. A scholar, a PhD, super postdoctoral, several doctoral theses in Islamic jurisprudence and so on. And when he became a Baha'i, of course, he put his turban aside, and he became one of the greatest scholars, researching many, many different aspects of philosophy and religion and holy scriptures and so on. He's left many big books and treatises and so on around. And he was also responsible for educating and helping the Westerners be educated in the new revelation. And he did some very thorough research on the genealogy of Baha'u'lláh.
Who was it with that big?
Mirza Abul Fazl. Who was he?
He's a scholar.
He was one of the biggest scholars.
Okay, it was not related to.
No.
Okay.
No, he wasn't related. I'm saying that he founded. He has a very interesting story. I got carried away. Sorry.
Okay, sorry.
He derived his descent, on the one hand, from Abraham, the father of the faithful, through his third wife, Keturah. Abraham had 3 wives. His third wife was Keturah. Baha'u'lláh descended from that third wife. And on the other hand, from Zoroaster, as well as from Yazgird, the last king of the Sasanian dynasty, who was one of the Persian Zoroastrian kings. He was, moreover, a descendant of Jesse, and belonged through his father, known as Mirza Buzurg, a nobleman closely associated with the ministerial circles of the court of the Shah, to one of the most ancient and renowned families of Mazandaran. So Baha'u'lláh was born in Tehran from a wonderful family because they had palaces, they had houses in Tehran, they had palaces and mansions in Takur and Mazandaran. And he was born in a state of great opulence, reminding us of Moses, who was born, remember, or he was not born, but he was brought up by the pharaohs, and the Buddha, who was a prince who had great wealth and opulence, but then left it, right? And he was an extraordinary child, right from the very early on. And his mother commented how he would never cry and be irritable like the other children, right? You just don't see that except in the manifestations of God. And we have many stories. Why are you laughing, Orion? Why did you?
Well, I'm thinking of myself. That's it.
How you were irritable when you were little?
Oh, yes.
Oh yeah, there you go. That's not. Sorry, you can't be a manifestation of God, Orion. Maybe in 1,000 years if you get reincarnated.
Well, I wait.
That's right. That's right. So you remember, he was an extraordinary child, similar to the founders of the great religions of the world. And there are many remarkable stories from his early childhood. And one of these stories are, if you remember, those of you who are from Christian background, tell me the story about Jesus when he was little.
He
Who
went
knows
to the
about that?
temple and spoke to the learned priest.
Very good. You get 2 points for that, Charlotte. Yeah, now she's getting some courage, you know. This is standing. Yes, so in Luke chapter, I think, 12, or 2, actually, he talks about, there's the story of when Jesus was only around 12 years old, and the family had come to Jerusalem for the Feast of Passover, right? And then he stayed behind. He actually left his family. He went and they went looking for him. They didn't know where he was. He had got lost. And then they found Jesus in the temple, the big, you know, the real temple, the temple in Jerusalem, speaking to the religious doctors, to the rabbis and Pharisees, these old guys with, you know, with big long beards and so on. And he was explaining to them and arguing with them about all these, you know, the abstruse passages of the scriptures, and he was sharing his wisdom and his answers with them. And they were astonished. They say, who is this little illiterate villager coming from an unknown guy coming? And they were just astonished. And then his parents found him and they say, why did you do this to us? We've missed you. You just left without letting us know. Why did you do this? And he turned around to his parents and said, don't you know that I must do my Father's business? And that's not carpentry. He wasn't talking about carpentry, right? He was talking about the Father's business, with a capital F. Don't you know that I must do my Father's business? Which is what, you know, my God, right? The Father's business. And then Mary kept this thing in her heart and she didn't tell anyone except for later, obviously. She must have told the story. That's the one story we have from the childhood of Jesus. And we have many stories also about Muhammad before he declared his mission and so on, and some of the others. And we know Krishna came out laughing, apparently. He was born laughing and, you know, very different, although we don't know those. But these ones, we are so lucky in this age that we have a completely 100% authenticated and verifiable record of all these events. They're not made up. There are many people who were enemies of the faith, not just friends or Baha'is or, you know, people who were but enemies of the faith, and onlookers and witnesses, from Westerners to scholars and so on, who actually have written these records down, and they're available in paper. They are available in paper or now in digital format. They're all being made into digital or digitalized for posterity, right? And it's a verifiable and written record. There is no doubt about any of these facts, okay, and stories and so on. They are told and written down at the same time and published by friend and enemy alike. And it is incredible because there are actually no reference points in history for this kind of similar phenomenon. It's the first time that we have this tremendous, this unbelievably amazing opportunity to look at the birth of a new progressive movement in the world that is to change the course and direction of human history at first hand, right? And we're so close to it, and there's no myths and doubts about it. And that's a real bonus for the real scholar and for the true seeker, right, of history to look at. So there is this story, for example, that he would converse from a young age, from a few years of age. He would converse on any subject and solve any problem presented to him in any gathering, including those of the religious clergy. One time, he was only, at one account, he was around 10, 11 years of age when he was in Mazandaran, in the north of Iran, in his father's house, and a taxman came to the house, okay? And he tried to solicit unfair taxes from his father. And you know, there was so much corruption in that country. In fact, Shoghi Effendi, the guardian of the faith, and also as said by many, attested by many scholars and Orientalists and onlookers, Iran of that time, the people of that country were the most corrupt, the most cowardly, and the most backward of nations. And that's why the manifestation of God always appears, messengers of God always come in the worst place on earth, right? They don't choose somewhere where it's already good and the people are nice and, you know, they're already pretty well advanced and so on. They don't. They actually come to the worst place on earth when the people have fallen to the worst state of degradation and abasement, because that is when the transforming power of the Word of God, of the revelation of God, really becomes apparent, right? To change and transform the worst type of people, the most cowardly, corrupt, backward of people, into a generation of heroes and saints and scientists and right philosophers and enlightened people. That is the real power of transformation. And so just like, for example, when the Arabian tribes, when Muhammad, peace be upon him, right, he appeared among the Arabs, there were 300 warring, barbarous, right, worst people on earth, barbarous Arabian tribes who were fighting with each other, burying their girls alive, etc. They had absolutely nothing in terms of civilization. They were just the most depraved of people. Same with the Jewish people when Jesus arrived, right? They were terrible. They had turned there was nothing left of the true spirit of Judaism, right, of the religion of God. He appeared when they were in a terrible state. They turned the temple into just a vending place for selling their stuff, right? Do you remember that? And Jesus came and overturned the whole table and said, "What have you done to the house of God, to my Father's house, etc." And he just completely challenged and revolutionized their ideas. So where was I? Don't change the subject, Michael. What were we talking about?
Childhood.
Yes, the childhood. How did we get to that anyway? Yes, we were talking about the taxman. Thank you. He was talking, this taxman. So they would come and they would be wanting to solicit bribes, right? Because they were so corrupt that all they cared about was money, backhand, in my pocket, etc. And the taxman came and he was unfairly asking Bahá'u'lláh to pay a whole lot more taxes. And Bahá'u'lláh, being, even at a very young age, being the upholder of justice, okay, and fairness, he asked permission from his father to go to Tehran, because the taxman wouldn't give in, to go to Tehran and solicit justice and fairness from the person of the Sultan himself, from the person of the Shah himself. So Bahá'u'lláh rode on a horse with an older servant. He rode all the way from Mazandaran to Tehran, which probably takes several days. He attained the court of the Shah, and he argued the case completely satisfactorily to the satisfaction of the Shah. And as a result of that, the Shah not only returned the taxes that had been unjustly solicited and taken to Bahá'u'llah's father, but he also dismissed the taxman from his job. Right? I mean, just imagine a sort of a 10, 12-year-old guy doing that. And there are many, and people knew that there was something very unusual about him. And there is a masterpiece of Persian literature. We have a little letter that he was only about 7 years old, 5 to 7 years old, that he wrote to his auntie. That's not been translated into English, but this is an unauthorized translation of that letter, which is very interesting. He talks to his auntie, and he says, "He is the well-beloved." So God is the well-beloved. God willing, inshallah, you are abiding restfully beneath the canopy of divine mercy and the tabernacle of his bounty. This is a 7-year-old writing a letter. Seriously. Although, then he says, although to outward seeming I am little and cannot write, yet because this illiterate one is connected to the divine low tree, he can read without knowledge and can write without schooling. Right? This fact is clear and evident in the spiritual realm to those endued with insight. Others have not been and are not aware of this mystery. Isn't it amazing? Say yes.
Yes.
Big yes. Come on. Who would write a little letter? Who would write a little one to his auntie? And he says, even though, and they didn't, they had the nobility of that time did not receive any formal schooling. They they learned to read the Quran a little bit. They maybe were taught how the basics of writing poetry, reading and writing and calligraphy and horsemanship and swordmanship. and things like that. That's what they did, but they didn't really go into the details of religion and philosophy and scriptures and so on. They had a basic learning, and Baha'u'lláh was only sort of doing this. So it's very interesting that all the manifestations of God, like Jesus, like Muhammad, etc., and of course Baha'u'lláh. There are many stories about the Bab, which you'll hear about in 2 years when you will be celebrating bicentenary of his birth, right? About the childhood. And of course these manifestations of God, these prophets were aware of their station from the moment that they were born, but they were not ready yet. And in the Quran, he said when Jesus was born, he talked. Remember, in the Quran about this story. That's not in the Bible actually. It's in the Quran, which is very interesting. In the Quran, there are many stories about Jesus that it's not even in the Bible, but it's it's fascinating because there's every revelation that comes, it fulfills and gives more of what's gone on before, more of the story. And in the Quran, it says that when Jesus was born, he actually talked, right? Which just absolutely amazed and, shocked the Pharisees and the Jews and so on. And they were just so shocked that they just left. They couldn't do anything. They were so scared. Right. So, yes. So there are all these things about the childhood of the manifestations, that they are actually completely aware of the secret of existence. Right, from the beginning, Abdu'l-Baha says, that holy reality, that's the manifestation of God, is conscious of the secret of existence. And from the age of childhood, signs of greatness appear and are visible in him. He says, therefore, how can it be that with all these bounties and perfections, he should have no consciousness? He can't. But if Jesus had come at the age of 12 and he says, I'm the Messiah, do you think anybody would have listened to him? No. Had Baha'u'lláh at the age of 5, when he wrote this letter to his auntie, or 7, he says, I am the promised one of all ages. Would somebody have listened to him? No. Okay, so what are you talking about? The little guy doesn't know what he's talking about. So there have to come a time when they break their silence, but they're completely aware of their station before that, from the minute they're born, right? They're different and apart. And they break their silence at the appointed time that God basically ordains. Okay, so this is Thakur in the north of Tehran, where the family of Baha'u'lláh had a house, and they had many, many lands, and they looked after them. They were a family who were renowned for their righteousness and justice. So even though they had a lot of wealth, they were very fair. They had lots of servants that they looked after. They were noble. They were not a corrupt, greedy, horrible family who would enslave their slaves and servants and so on. Everybody was happy to be part of the estate, if you like, of this wonderful family, and they were well known for this. And when Baha'u'lláh was a youth, this is the house of Baha'u'lláh, and it was, of course, destroyed by the Iranian government. They destroyed every single holy place belonging to they want to efface the whole trace of every single thing. It was destroyed in Mazandaran, but thankfully the Baha'is had been clever enough to take very careful maps and designs of all these houses, so they will be built in the future, but the originals have been destroyed, unfortunately, by these fanatics. And and so they were, what was I going to say? The house of Baha'u'lláh, where they lived. And yes, in early adulthood, now this is very interesting, that in early adulthood, right, and his youth, the ministers of the court of the Shah, because he was back and forth between Tehran and Mazandaran, and he was always walking, right, and associating with the most elite families and people in the whole of Iran, right? And he developed such a respect among all the echelons of society that they offered him. They say you could be the prime minister yourself. They offered him some of the highest ministerial positions, right? But Baha'u'lláh flatly refused to take any of those. And in fact, the prime minister told someone else who was recommending him to come into the ministerial position. He said, I don't know what it is about him. I don't know what it is about him, but his affairs do not belong to us. He walks in a different realm, right? He is not the same as the rest of us, right? He has some higher aim in mind. And there is that story I forgot to tell that most of us know. Most of the Baha'is who have been brought up as children will know the story that his father had a dream when he was only a few years old. When Baha'u'lláh was a few years old, he dreamt that Baha'u'lláh was swimming in the sea. And as he was swimming in the sea, around about his head started glowing with a tremendous light. And so much so that it actually lit up the ocean. And there are many thousands of fishes that were attracted towards him, and each of these fishes swam towards him, and each of them got hold of one of the strands of his hair. And at the same time, as he was going, in another version of it, several birds started attacking him from the sky, and they would come and try to attack him, but they could not bring any harm to him. And Baha'u'lláh just continued swimming, untrammeled and undisturbed in this ocean. And when he woke up, he realized this is a very strange dream. It must have some meaning. So he called a soothsayer. Soothsayer, somebody who can interpret dreams properly, a very pious man. He recounted to him the story, and he said, "What does this mean?" And the soothsayer said that your dream has a very, very deep and significant meaning. It means that this son will become the author of a great, great revelation, of a great event, of a great movement in the world. And that he will start and he will be so famous and illumined that many people from all the different, the fishes represent the people of the world, that many people will be attracted to him and they will come and follow him. And the birds represent, again, the people of the world and nations of the world who will try to attack him and rise against him, but they will not manage to bring any harm to his person. And that his cause will spread and he will create a great revolution in the history of humanity. So that was one story. And in early adulthood, when he was 18, at the time, according to the traditions of the time, he married at the age of 18 to Asiya Khanum from another prominent family in Noor, as was the custom. And this was Baha'u'llah's beloved companion throughout his life of suffering and hardships. They had 7 children, but 4 of them died in infancy. Just know that, these messengers of God also experience all the grief and hardships many times over to what we ordinary people also experience. And then the young couple, and this Asiya Khanum, this lovely lady, was also very noble and very wonderful. And the two of them set about using their time to look after the downtrodden and the poor and spreading their wealth, spending their wealth on the poor and the disconsolate. And they became known as the father of the poor and the mother of consolation, which is very interesting. So he did not engage himself in parties and festivities and the high life, right? The good life, as was known at that time. But this is the time, this is what they did spend their time doing. And Baha'u'lláh had a great love of nature. And this is a gardener at Baha'u'llah's house in Shimran, although I know these are very early pictures, historic pictures, so before the color photography came into being. There was one time, and he used to spend a lot of time in nature. And there was one time when Baha'u'lláh was going, riding with a few of his companions in nature. And there is this story that when he was going there, in the countryside, he saw a man, a dervish. You know what a dervish is? Yeah. It's like a hermit, somebody who who just goes away, you know, who isolates himself from society, lives a very simple life, like, you know, the hermits in India and so on, right?
Like a Finnish person.
Like a Finnish person? There you go. Yeah. I'm not sure. I don't think you're pretty well clothed and watered. Yeah, I don't think you're a hermit. You've got nice shoes on and etc. And so do you, Nico. And yeah, so you don't look like dervishes to me. But a dervish is a hermit who isolates, lives on very little, you know, spends his time praying and basically, and they ask for alms and they ask for, basically they beg and they live a very simple life, no housing, they're nomads, etc. And as Bahá'u'lláh saw this young man, as he was riding through the countryside, saw this young man sitting beside a river by a brook, near which he had kindled a fire and he was cooking and eating his food. Bahá'u'lláh was attracted by the simplicity of this man. So he came down from his horse and he went towards him and gently inquired as to what he was doing. And the young man said, I am cooking and eating God. Okay? Because actually many of these Sufis, the dervishes, etc., they were like pantheistic, or, you know, they had these sort of ideas that, these sort of outdated ideas of a God is in the things, was the answer. Bahá'u'lláh was so interested by the simplicity of this reply in the youth's unaffected manner that he came down and engaged him in conversation. The friendly affection displayed by Bahá'u'lláh quickly won the heart of that youth. The way they talked to him with such simplicity and geniality and with such love and affection just completely and quickly attracted the heart of this youth, who in a short period of time accepted the more enlightened view of God, which Bahá'u'lláh offered to him, and became so enamored of this genial, mysterious stranger that he abandoned his cooking utensils and followed him. So then Bahá'u'lláh, when he wouldn't leave him alone, he left everything. He suddenly got attracted to this person of Bahá'u'lláh by the few words that he'd offered. And on foot, behind his horse, he danced along, as the Sufis would, right? He danced along, singing the verses of a love song, which he composed as he was going, saying, Thou art the day star of guidance. You are the day star, means the sun. You are the sun of guidance. You are the light of truth. Unveil thyself. Reveal yourself. Who are you, he said. Tell me who you are. You are the day star of truth. Tell me who you are. Unveil yourself. Show me who you are, right? And it was his constant refrain. His name was Mustafa. And his poem later had a wide circulation among the dervishes of that area. And Nabil, who is the great Persian, the great historian of this episode, of the whole episode of the Babi Baha'i history, wondered whether this unlettered, this illiterate dervish, was uplifted to so joyful a condition, whether he had been shown a glimpse of the future glory of the station of Bahá'u'lláh, right? That he was at that time was completely hidden from everybody. And yeah, so that's an interesting story. But things completely turned around. Got 5 more minutes, yeah? Or should we, yeah. Yes.
I think that this man reminds me of a charismatic Christian man who is enlightened by the Holy Spirit.
That's right. Yeah, absolutely. There are many examples. Yeah. So things completely turn around for Bahá'u'lláh when, at the age of 27, in 1844, right, he espoused the faith of the herald, the Bab. Okay, and the incidence is interesting when the Bab, who was the Bab is like John the Baptist to Christians. John the Baptist, who came to prepare the way for the coming of Jesus. And Muhammad also had many people who prepared, and the Bab himself had Sheikh Ahmad and, Sayyid Kazem and so on. Many people who prepared the way for the coming of the Messiah, for the coming of the promised one. And the Bab in a way was similar, right? Just as Jesus had been baptized by John the Baptist and became outwardly a follower of John the Baptist initially, right, before he declared his mission. In the same way, when the Bab declared his mission and sent a messenger, his first disciple, to Tehran to find this mystery, to find a mystery. He said, there is a great mystery hidden in Tehran, and I want you to go to, this is Mullah Hussein, I want you to go and find that mystery in Tehran. And when Mullah Hussein went there through an incident which we don't have time to go into, but he actually inquired about someone who was great. You know, who was it that was great and showed signs of greatness from this family of Mirza Buzurg, from this family in Takur, and they were led to Bahá'u'lláh. And anyway, as soon as, to cut a long story short, as soon as Bahá'u'lláh read the words of the Bab, right, which were given to him in a scroll, he read this, the messenger came and brought the scroll of a tablet of a few words of the Bab. As soon as he read this, he said to his brother, who was there, Mirza Musa, Musa, don't you think that these words have the same power and the same authority as the words of Muhammad in the Quran, or the words of the manifestations of God? And they both at that time agreed. And Baha'u'lláh, from that moment, became a follower of his herald, of the Bab, and from that moment his life completely changed. Because at that time, what happened is that he started immediately to spread the word, the news of the coming of the Bab, of this new revelation. And that is also when his problems began. That is also when the trials and tribulations began. So because of Baha'u'llah's position, not just because of his position, but because of the tremendous moral and spiritual authority that he had, already he had admirers all throughout Persia. He was quite famous throughout the country. Because of that, he became the natural leader of the Babi community, who was bitterly persecuted during this time. For a while, he went to Karbala, to the Holy Land, to Iraq. Karbala is in Iraq, right? He went to Iraq, to Karbala, to help the Babi community at that time there. Then he returned to Iran, and he set about, as I said, spreading the word of the faith, of the new faith, and many, many people converted to the new faith. He also went to the north of Iran, to his own hometown, and he set about also teaching the faith there, and many thousands of people became believers at that time. And then there was this incident in Badasht. It's a conference that he convened where it had a twofold purpose. At this time, the Bab had been imprisoned in the north of Iran, and Baha'u'lláh convened this conference so that he could achieve two purposes. One was to make a plan on how to release the Bab from imprisonment in the north of Iran. The second plan was to show the new believers that this was a new independent revelation from God, that this is not just a continuation of Islam, but it actually is the birth of a new revelation. And I think on this note, we will stop, have some tea, coffee, refreshments, stretching, fresh air, and we'll come back and talk about the rest of the story. Thank you for your patience.